Tonight we step into the frozen heartbeat of the Mongolian steppe in the middle of winter. You're inside a low, round GER, its felt walls thick with the scent of smoke and wool. Outside, the world is a white ocean of snow, the horizon lost in a haze of frost, and the wind sings that sharp, metallic note that says it could strip the warmth from your bones in minutes. Inside, you're wrapped in layered blankets, your breath hanging in the air like tiny ghosts every time you exhale. The first thing you notice isn't the cold, it's the smell. Something rich and sweet, faintly grassy, curling through the air. It's the boiling milk. Somewhere near the center of the GER, over a stove fueled by yesterday's dried animal dung, yes, you're cooking breakfast over poop. Welcome to the steppe. A pot bubbles softly, steam puffing out like a sleepy dragon. You're not fully awake yet, but you know this scent. It's the scent of survival. And, to be blunt, you probably wouldn't last one morning out here without it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so I can see where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up slowly, the air biting at your cheeks, and glance toward the stove. The milk inside is from yesterday's milking, kept warm under layers of cloth overnight so it wouldn't freeze solid. Even so, a thin skin of cream had formed on top, now dissolving back into the bubbling liquid. Somewhere in the corner, you hear the faint jingling of harness straps, the animals outside shifting in the snow, impatient for the day to begin. The walls of the GER aren't just plain felt. They're layered, wool for insulation, canvas for wind resistance, sometimes even animal hides stitched together. Every layer smells faintly of the seasons that have passed, summer grass, autumn rain, and the deep musk of winter livestock. Your bed isn't a bed, exactly, more a low wooden platform with furs and blankets piled high, each one heavier than the last. Through the open flap at the top of the GER, you can see the sky, still dark, with only the faintest thread of dawn pushing against it. A few stubborn stars cling to the cold air. In a few minutes, the light will creep across the snow, revealing just how far the emptiness stretches. Out here, neighborhood means your nearest human is probably a couple of kilometers away, separated by wind, frozen rivers, and the occasional disapproving yak. The milk pot boils harder now, and you notice the figure moving beside it, thick felt deal robe, sash tied tight, fur hat pulled low over the ears. They stir the milk with a long wooden spoon, slow and methodical. It's not just breakfast, they're making sure the fat stays suspended, the flavor balanced. You know that later, a portion will be turned into tea, some into yogurt, and some left to cool into cream. Nothing in this pot will go to waste. You stretch your toes under the blankets, trying to gather the courage to face the air beyond your cocoon. Your breath fogs again, curling toward the ceiling. You realize your lips are already dry, this air is so cold it drinks the moisture straight from you. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember reading that winters here can drop to -40 degrees Celsius. Historians still argue whether the diet of nomads evolved purely out of necessity or if it was also a deep cultural choice tied to identity, but you know for certain, without fat and protein-laden breakfasts like this, you wouldn't be telling the story right now. The milk's scent intensifies, carrying with it the earthy undertones of the pasture from which it came. You imagine the animals, stocky, double-coated yaks and horses with their long winter fur, standing in the snow, exhaling clouds as they wait for their morning feed. Somewhere beyond the GER, their hooves crunch on ice. In the corner, there's a small wooden chest. Inside are yesterday's dairy treasures, a few chunks of rock-hard arul curd, wrapped in cloth, and a pouch of clotted cream that looks like a tiny pillow. These aren't for right now, but knowing they're there is oddly comforting. Finally, you slide from the bed. The floor is packed earth, hard as stone in this cold. Your felt boots are waiting. You slip them on and shuffle toward the stove. The steam hits your face like a warm sigh. The milk shifts in color now, faintly yellow, fat swirling on top. You could almost fall asleep again just from watching it move. But instead, you take the long spoon, give it one slow turn, and think, yes, this will keep me alive until the sun decides to show up. The warmth from the stove clings to you for only a moment before you step outside. The flap of the GER swings shut behind you with a muffled thump, and the cold bites into your face like 1,000 tiny needles. The air is so sharp you half expect it to crack if you breathe too hard. It's early, barely enough light to make out the shapes of the animals in their corral, their backs dusted in frost like sugared pastries. Your boots crunch over the snow, the sound loud in the stillness. Out here, nothing moves fast in the morning except the wind, and the wind is merciless. The first job of the day is the milking, and winter milking is no lazy, pastoral scene. It's a test of patience, coordination, and just enough stubbornness to match the animals. The yak nearest to you shifts as you approach, her breath puffing out in white bursts. She's shorter than a cow back home, but built like a tank, with shaggy fur that sways when she moves. Her eyes have that unblinking, judgmental calm that makes you feel like you've been weighed, measured, and found slightly lacking. You crouch beside her, wooden pail ready, and slide your hands under her belly. The warmth of her udder is immediate and startling, like plunging your hands into a pocket of summer hidden under all that hair. But it doesn't last. Your fingers quickly start to stiffen in the cold. The trick is to keep moving, keep squeezing, keep the milk flowing. Each stream hits the pail with a soft hiss, steam curling upward and tangling with your own breath. The rhythm is hypnotic: squeeze, release, until the pail is half full and your knuckles feel like they might turn to stone. You glance over at the mares in the distance. They're next. Mare's milk in winter is rarer. Most mares don't produce much this time of year, but every drop counts. It's thinner, tangier, destined not for tea but for fermentation. You know the drink, irag. Even in this cold, the fermentation process doesn't stop, just slows to a crawl. Historians still argue whether irag in the mornings was ever meant as a breakfast drink, or if it was just the quickest way to warm up and get a tiny buzz before facing the day. Either way, you're about to find out again. The milking here is different. You have to crouch low, steady the mare, and work faster, because horses are less patient than yaks and twice as likely to sidestep just as you're finding a good rhythm. The first streams are colder, but soon the milk runs warm, pale, and thin into your container. It smells faintly grassy, even in winter, a reminder of the green months to come. Somewhere behind you, you hear laughter, a short, knowing chuckle from another herder watching your awkward form. City hands, they tease, though their voice is friendly. They carry their own full pail toward the GER, their movements smooth, practiced, no wasted energy. You make a mental note to ask them later about their grip, though you're not sure you'll survive the answer. By the time you're done, your hands are stiff and red, the skin on your knuckles starting to crack from the cold. You blow on them as you walk back toward the GER, the pails sloshing gently. The animals watch you go, their breath hanging in the air like speech bubbles filled with unspoken opinions. Inside, the warmth hits again like stepping into another world. The stove's fire is still strong, the milk pot bubbling away. You set your pails beside it, already thinking ahead. Some of this fresh milk will be boiled, some poured into skin bags for fermentation, and some churned into butter. Nothing here has a single purpose. Every drop is part of a chain that stretches through the whole winter. The churn sits near the wall, a tall wooden cylinder with a plunger handle worn smooth by years of hands. Later, you'll take turns pushing the plunger up and down, thickening cream into something spreadable, dense, and full of the kind of calories you need to ride all day without freezing. But first, tea. The fresh milk will join yesterday's brew, turning the bitter leaves into something rich and velvety. You sit for a moment near the stove, flexing your fingers back to life. The steam carries the scent of the pasture, the animals, the faint tang of wood smoke from the dung fire. It's a smell that means morning here, a smell that's as much about survival as it is about flavor. And as you lean closer, you realize that even though you've only been awake an hour, the day's work has already begun to shape your hunger into something fierce. Breakfast isn't just a meal here, it's fuel, warmth, and a quiet promise that you can face whatever this frozen horizon throws at you. The milk you carried in still sways in the pails, and now it's time for the first real act of breakfast making, the boiling. The pot on the stove is already halfway there, but fresh milk transforms the scent instantly. You pour it in, the sound a soft, creamy rush, and a layer of pale foam blooms across the surface. The stove itself is small, squat, and iron black, its sides glowing faintly from the heat within. It's fueled by carefully stacked dung cakes, yesterday's collection from the animals, dried in the open air until they're hard enough to burn cleanly. You'd think this would smell terrible, but in truth, it gives off a mellow, earthy aroma, almost like peat smoke. The combination of that scent with boiling milk is unexpectedly comforting. You take a long wooden ladle and begin stirring in a slow, clockwise motion. The milk shifts from pure white to a faint golden hue as fat rises to the surface, breaking into shimmering islands. Every so often you scrape the spoon along the bottom, making sure nothing sticks. Steam rises in thick curls, beading on your eyelashes. This is the moment when things start to feel alive, because breakfast here is never just milk on its own. You reach for the blocks of dried milk from the small chest in the corner. These aren't like any milk you've seen in a store, they're compacted bricks, hard as wood, made by boiling milk down until almost all the water is gone, then drying the concentrated curds in the open air. Each block holds the ghost of a dozen mornings like this one. You drop one into the pot, and it sinks with a soft plop before bobbing to the surface. Slowly, it begins to dissolve, thickening the liquid, giving it body and depth. The sound changes too, the rolling boil softens to a deep, contented burble. Historians still argue whether this kind of preserved dairy was invented purely to survive the brutal winters, or if it started as a way to make food portable for long rides. Either way, it's genius. You could carry one of these bricks in a steel bag for months, and it would still taste like the pasture when you finally boiled it. A hand reaches past you and sprinkles in a pinch of salt. This might seem strange for milk, but here it's a necessity. Salt preserves, sure, but it also gives the drink a backbone, turning it from something you sip politely into something that can carry you through a blizzard. You stir again, watching the last corners of the brick melt into the creamy swirl. In the background, you hear the dull thump of someone churning butter in the tall wooden cylinder. The rhythm is steady, like a heartbeat. You can almost imagine the muscles in their arms flexing with each push, the cream inside slowly thickening, grains of butter forming under the relentless motion. Later, a portion of this butter will go right into the milk tea, creating a drink so rich you'll feel it coating your ribs. But for now, it's the sound of the pot that holds your attention. The steam rolls toward the ceiling, condensing and dripping down in tiny rivulets. You know that somewhere outside, the snow is still falling in fine, wind-driven sheets, but in here, the world has been reduced to warmth, scent, and the soft, liquid murmur of breakfast. You lean over and taste the tiniest spoonful. The heat hits first, then the salt, then that unmistakable grassy sweetness of fresh milk. It's richer than anything you've had back home, not sugary, but deep, the kind of flavor that comes from animals who graze on wild steppe grass instead of anything cultivated. It coats your tongue, and for a moment, you just stand there with your eyes closed, holding it in your mouth as if you can store it for later. Then, without thinking, you ladle yourself a small bowl. The heat seeps into your hands through the rough ceramic, and you sip slowly, feeling each swallow travel all the way down to your stomach like a trail of fire. You can almost hear your body sigh. The pot keeps boiling for the rest of the household, there's no rush. Breakfast here isn't a plated meal brought to a table, It's a rolling, evolving process. People take what they need, when they need it. You can imagine riders coming in from checking the herds at the edge of camp, steam curling off their coats, leaning over the pot for a quick bowl before heading back into the cold. You glance toward the flap door, half expecting someone to burst in right now. Instead, the wind pushes against it, making it tremble in its frame. It's a reminder, the warmth in here is precious, temporary, and entirely built on the work you've already done this morning. Your bowl empty, you set it aside, ready for the next stage. Somewhere in this breakfast sequence, comes something sharper, tangier, a drink that can wake you up even more than this first pot. But for now, the milk still bubbles, thickening into the heart of the morning. The pot still murmurs behind you, but now your attention shifts to a smaller container set off to the side. It's holding mare's milk from earlier, a pale, almost translucent liquid that sloshes differently from the rich yak milk you've just boiled. This isn't destined for tea, it's Irag, and drinking it at sunrise in the dead of winter might be one of the more questionable life choices you're about to make. The skin bag it came from hangs like an old friend near the stove. You can smell it before you even touch it, a faint tang that hints at something between yogurt and champagne. Out here, fermentation isn't some hip foodie trend, it's a survival tactic. It preserves what little you can get from your animals in the cold months and, yes, adds that faint buzz that can make the morning seem just a little less brutal. You pour a ladle into a wooden bowl. The liquid is cool despite the warmth of the GER, the fermentation slowing but never stopping in the winter chill. It's cloudy, with tiny bubbles clinging to the edges. You lift it to your lips and take a cautious sip. The taste is sharp, sharper than you remember from summer. It hits the sides of your tongue with an acidic brightness, then mellows into something faintly sweet and grassy. You can feel the carbonation prickling against the roof of your mouth. It's not exactly what you'd call refreshing when your breath is already visible in the air, but there's a strange comfort in it. It's like drinking a reminder that the world still has life in it, even under all this snow. Historians still argue whether Irag was ever intended to be part of breakfast or if it was simply too precious to save for later in the day. Some accounts suggest it was taken in small amounts before riding out, both as fortification and courage. Others insist it was more ceremonial, a shared drink that marked the start of the day. Either way, here you are, standing with your bowl, feeling the warmth of the fire at your back and the fizz of fermented mare's milk waking up your senses. In the corner, someone else has theirs, and they tip the bowl back in one smooth motion. You follow suit, though yours takes more than one gulp. By the time you reach the bottom, the cold in your bones feels a fraction less aggressive. Or maybe that's just the faint warmth spreading from your stomach. Either way, you decide not to question it. The leftover Irag in the skin bag will last for days if kept near the stove long enough to be doled out in careful portions. Sometimes it's mixed into warm drinks, other times it's just sipped plain, the way you've just had it. You run your hand over the outside of the bag, feeling the slight give of the leather, the faint warmth from the nearby fire. A small plate of dried curds appears on the low table beside you. You take one instinctively, more out of politeness than hunger, but immediately regret biting into it without warming it up first. It's rock hard, like trying to chew a pebble, and it takes a moment before the tangy, milky flavor starts to bloom on your tongue. You let it sit in your cheek while you work your jaw slowly, the curd softening just enough to swallow. Someone makes a joke about how eating arul in winter is the closest thing Mongolian nomads have to a dental fitness routine. You chuckle, your voice still wrapped in the warmth of the GER, knowing full well you'll be gnawing another piece before long. The air outside calls again, there's more work before breakfast is truly ready, but for now, the mare's milk has done its job. You can feel the faint hum of energy in your chest, the way your fingers seem a little more willing to move. You glance at the pot of boiling milk tea again, imagining the butter waiting to be stirred in, and think, maybe this isn't such a questionable choice after all. The butter churn has been working in slow, hypnotic rhythm for what feels like forever. Every push of the plunger sends a dull whump through the wooden cylinder, the sound muffled by the thick felt walls of the GER. You kneel beside it, hands on the worn handle, and take over from the last pair of tired arms. The motion is deceptively simple, straight up, straight down, but after the first dozen strokes, you can feel it in your shoulders. The cream inside is cool, even here by the stove, and thick enough to resist the plunger. You keep moving, feeling the faint give as fat globules start to gather into something more solid. This isn't the golden butter you know from supermarket shelves. It's heavier, richer, the product of animals that survive on wind-battered steppe grass and the occasional pocket of lichen under the snow. Minutes stretch into something almost meditative. The fire pops, sending up a few sparks. You hear the quiet conversation of the other herders in the background, short words, soft laughter. At some point, your movements grow automatic, the butter forming without you even noticing until the resistance changes and the sound shifts from thick cream to a more sloshing, watery rhythm. You stop, lift the lid, and there it is, a pale, dense lump floating in thin, bluish liquid. This liquid, the byproduct, is tart but drinkable. It'll be used later for soups or even just sipped on its own. But the lump is what you've been working for. You reach in with a wooden paddle and lift it out, water dripping back into the churn. It's heavier than it looks, cool and pliable under your fingers. You set it on a shallow wooden plate and start kneading. The excess liquid runs out in thin streams, and you fold the butter over itself, pressing it into a compact, solid mass. The smell is faint, clean, creamy, with a whisper of grass. This is the fuel of winter, pure, concentrated fat. Historians still argue whether the early nomads prized butter more as a trade good or as a household staple. In regions closer to trade routes, it could be exchanged for grain, tea, or even fine fabrics. But here, far from the markets, it stays in the GER, becoming the heart of countless meals. A portion is cut away and dropped directly into the pot of milk tea still bubbling over the stove. The butter melts in slow, glossy swirls, the surface of the tea turning from pale beige to a deeper, more golden tone. You know that in a few minutes, each sip will leave a faint film on your lips, the kind that lingers in the best possible way. The rest of the butter is shaped into small, squat mounds, each wrapped in cloth and set in the coolest part of the GER. They'll last for weeks this way, slowly hardening in the dry air. In the absolute coldest spells, you might have to chip off pieces with a knife, like cutting through cheese. Someone offers you a slice on a piece of warm bread. You bite incautiously, expecting the salt to punch first, but no, it's the creaminess that takes over, followed by a faint sweetness that spreads through your mouth. The bread is plain, but the butter makes it feel like something decadent. For a moment, you're not in a frozen desert, you're at a feast. A herder across the room chuckles, pointing to your face. You realize you've got a faint smear of butter on your lip, and wipe it away with the back of your hand. Out here, calories aren't a guilty pleasure, they're survival insurance. And this mound of butter sitting on the plate is worth more in the cold months than a stack of coins. You take another bite, letting the warmth of the bread and the richness of the butter melt together, thinking that of all the morning rituals you've seen so far, this might be the one you'd miss most if you ever left the steppe. The scent of the butter still lingers in the air, but now another aroma begins to edge in, something deeper, meatier, faintly salty. You turn toward the low table near the stove and see strips of mutton laid out on a flat wooden board. They're not fresh cuts. These have been salted and dried, hung in the cold air until they're as tough as leather. This is meat before sunrise, the kind you eat not because it's gentle on your teeth, but because it's the surest way to keep the wind from finding the gaps in your ribs later in the day. Out here, a good breakfast leans heavy, because the cold will burn through your calories like a wildfire. You pick up a strip, its surface glistening slightly where fat has solidified in the chill. The first bite is a test. You have to chew slowly, working the fibers loose, letting the salt wake up your mouth. The flavor is pure steppe, strong, a little gamey, with a richness that settles low in your stomach. A pot sits nearby with hot water just off the boil. One of the herders dips their strip of mutton into it for a few seconds, softening it before biting in. You try the same, and the meat yields a little easier, the fat warming and releasing its flavor in slow waves. Steam rises from your hands, and you take another bite, letting the salt and richness mingle. Historians still argue whether salted mutton was primarily a winter food or simply a nomadic constant across all seasons. The preservation process, cutting the meat thin, salting it heavily, and hanging it in the wind, was as old as the herding culture itself. What's certain is that in this cold, meat doesn't spoil, it just waits, patient and unchanging, until you need it. There's no ceremony to eating it. You chew, you swallow, you keep going. Conversation stays light, mostly short remarks about the weather, the animals, or a bit of teasing about who's chewing the loudest. You take in the scene, steam curling from teacups, the flicker of the stove's light on felt walls, the occasional pop from the dung fire. Someone offers you a piece of fat from the tail of a fat-tailed sheep, and you hesitate only briefly. The chunk is white, firm, and cool to the touch. You take a small bite, and it melts almost instantly, coating your tongue with a buttery smoothness. It's not for everyone, but here, it's a prized energy source, the kind of food that lets you ride all day without stopping. You can feel it sitting heavy, steady, in your stomach. Not in a bad way, more like a slow-burning ember you'll carry into the cold. The herder next to you wipes his hands on his deal, takes a swig of hot milk tea, and nods as if to say, "There. That's breakfast." But you know there's more. This meat is just one part of the morning's progression, the kind of thing you nibble between other dishes. The smell of something richer, wetter, is already beginning to rise from the stove, and your mind drifts toward it. For now, though, you take one last bite of mutton, tucking a smaller strip into your pocket for later. Out on the steppe, you never know when you might need it, whether to share with another rider or to chew slowly while the horizon stretches endlessly in front of you. The meat in your stomach is already working its quiet magic, but the real anchor of the morning is simmering just a few steps away. You can smell it before you see it, that deep, savory perfume that comes from bone marrow surrendering itself to the slow heat. You kneel by the stove, lift the lid of the heavy pot, and there it is, bone broth, a dark golden brown liquid rolling in gentle bubbles, with a thin sheen of fat rippling on the surface. Inside, long bones sit like the beams of a half-sunken ship. Some still hold their marrow, the centers dark and rich, others have already given it up to the water. Shreds of meat cling here and there, softened by hours of cooking. This isn't a quick dish, it started before dawn, maybe even the night before. And that's the beauty of it. By the time you're ready, it's been transformed into something that feels like it could warm you from the inside out, even if you were standing barehanded in a blizzard. A ladle dips in, bringing up steaming liquid that smells like the memory of every meal you've ever had after being cold for too long. You take a wooden bowl between your hands and let the heat soak into your fingers. The first sip is almost too hot, but you don't care, it hits your tongue salty and rich, with that silky texture only good marrow can give. You swallow, and the warmth spreads like a slow fuse through your chest, down into your stomach. Historians still argue whether bone broth in nomadic life was valued more as a daily staple or as a kind of medicine. Its nutrient density is undeniable, but so is its role in ritual hospitality. Guests were often served broth first, before any other food. Out here, offering it is like saying, "I want you to survive this winter." You glance back at the pot, and notice someone using a long, thin stick to poke at the marrow still trapped inside one of the bones. They slide it free with practiced ease, dropping the piece straight into their bowl. You're offered a turn, and after a moment of polite hesitation, you try it. The marrow is soft, almost creamy, with a flavor that's part beef, part butter, and entirely satisfying. Sometimes, when broth is plentiful, it's thickened with a handful of flour or millet to make it stretch further. Today, though, it's pure. The herder sitting across from you spoons in a few chunks of salted mutton for extra heft, the meat soaking up the broth's richness. You follow suit, and the result is transformative. The meat softens even more, the flavors blending in a way that makes you wish this bowl would never empty. You can feel your body responding, shoulders loosening, fingers thawing. Outside, the wind might be sharpening its claws for the day, but inside, the fire and the broth are conspiring to make you believe you could walk straight into it and not flinch. The pot sits heavy on the stove, always ready for another ladle. It's a living thing, in a way, topped up with water when it gets low, fed with fresh bones when they're available. It might simmer for days, changing slightly with each meal, each addition. You think about that, about the way flavors can layer over time until they become something you can't pin to a single moment. Someone cracks a joke about how you'll never want soup from a city cafe again after this. You laugh, but quietly, because deep down, you know they're right. You finish the last of your broth, tilt the bowl to catch every drop, and set it down with a kind of reverence. There's more to eat before the morning is done, but this is the heart of it. Everything else will feel like an echo of this moment, steam on your face, warmth in your chest, and the knowledge that you've just swallowed the steppe's most ancient promise of survival. The broth settles warmly in your stomach, but the scent of something toasty and almost sweet starts drifting across the GER, tugging your attention away from the stove. Near the far wall, an iron griddle plate has been set directly over the firebox, its surface already hot enough to make the air shimmer. Beside it sits a wooden bowl of dough, thick, pale, and slightly sticky, dusted with a light coating of flour to keep it from clinging to fingers. Flatbread is coming. The dough is portioned into small, dense lumps, each one flattened between calloused palms until it's just a little thicker than your thumb. There's no rolling pin here, no perfect circles, every piece is unique, shaped by the hands that make it. The moment the first piece hits the griddle, it lets out a sharp hiss, the moisture in the dough instantly meeting the searing heat. A faint smell of browning flour rises, mingling with the ever-present undertone of smoke from the dung fire. You can see tiny bubbles forming under the surface of the bread, the edges going from pale white to a deep golden brown. A quick flip with a flat wooden paddle, and the other side starts to blister. You're offered the first piece, still so hot you can barely hold it. The surface is slightly crisp, but when you tear it open, steam escapes in a rush, revealing a chewy, almost elastic interior. You take a bite and the texture surprises you, dense enough to be filling, but soft enough that it bends rather than crumbles. The flavor is plain, but in the best way, it's a blank canvas for whatever it's eaten with. Historians still argue whether nomadic flatbreads like this were a rare treat made when there was spare flour or if they were a staple for those with good trade access. In the deepest interior of the steppe, flour can be scarce in winter, so bread like this might only appear when there's been a recent journey to a trading post. That makes every bite feel like a small celebration. While more pieces cook, one of the herders takes the fresh bread and dips it directly into the pot of milk tea. You follow their lead, holding your slice in for just long enough to soak up the salty, buttery liquid without falling apart. When you bite down, the tea bursts from the bread into your mouth, warm and savory, the richness of the butter cutting through the plainness of the dough. Some pieces are eaten with butter straight from the mound made earlier, the heat of the bread melting it instantly. Others are saved for later, wrapped in cloth to be eaten cold on horseback. You tuck one into your pocket without thinking. You've seen enough this morning to know that having extra food on hand is never a bad idea here. A small batch is shaped differently, cut into long, finger-sized strips before being fried in a shallow pan of fat. These turn into bortsog, crisp and golden, with an almost biscuit-like sweetness despite no sugar being added. When they're pulled from the pan, they're set to cool briefly before being handed around, still warm enough to make your fingertips tingle. You try one, and the crunch gives way to a slightly chewy center. It's comforting in the way only fried bread can be. Someone jokes that these are the closest thing nomads have to cookies, and you can see why. The frying fat leaves a faint sheen on your lips, the kind that lingers even after you lick them. The griddle never stops working. As soon as one batch comes off, another goes on. The cycle is soothing: flatten, hiss, flip, serve. It feels like the heartbeat of the morning, steady and dependable. By the time you've had your fill, you realize the bread has done what it was meant to, bridged the gap between the protein-heavy dishes and the rest of the breakfast still to come. It's not the main event, but without it, something would be missing, like the pause between breaths before you speak again. The last of the bread disappears, leaving only the faint scent of cooked flour lingering in the air. You're just starting to think that breakfast might be winding down when a small cloth sack is set on the low table in front of you. It lands with a solid thunk, far heavier than it looks. When the drawstring is loosened, a handful of pale, irregular shapes tumble out. They're small, about the size of walnuts, but far from soft. Each one looks like it could chip a tooth if you got too confident. This is our rule, the dried curds that Mongolian nomads have relied on for centuries. The first piece you pick up feels like stone, cool and smooth in your hand. It smells faintly of sour milk and sun-bleached grass. You try biting into it, but your teeth immediately protest, so you follow the lead of the others, pop it in your mouth, let it rest against your cheek, and wait. The initial sensation is nothing, just hardness. But as the heat of your mouth works its slow magic, the edges begin to soften. A sharp tang emerges, like a cross between yogurt and lemon, followed by a gentle milkiness that lingers long after you've swallowed. There's no rush with our rule. Chewing it right away is a rookie mistake. You let time do the work. Historians still argue whether our rule was developed purely as a preservation method or if it carried ceremonial weight in early nomadic life. Some say the act of making it, boiling curds, pressing them, then leaving them to dry under the relentless sun, was as much about maintaining cultural rhythm as it was about survival. What's certain is that these curds can last months, even years, without spoiling, making them perfect for long journeys across the steppe. The batch you're eating now is winter arul, made when the sun's lower and the air even drier, which gives it a more brittle texture. There's a variety for every season, some sweeter, some saltier, some made from cow's milk, others from yak or even camel. You can taste the difference if you pay attention. Winter arul often has a sharper bite, like it knows you need a jolt to wake you up in the cold. A younger herder grins and pulls a piece from his pocket, showing you that it's not just for the breakfast table. Arul is a traveler's snack, a constant companion in saddlebags and coat pockets. You imagine riding for hours in the biting wind, reaching into your coat for one of these little dairy rocks, and letting it dissolve slowly as you scan the horizon. A few pieces are offered alongside honey, a rare treat in these parts. The sticky sweetness clings stubbornly to the curd, turning it into something almost candy-like. You try one and find the contrast addictive. The honey softens the sourness without erasing it. Someone laughs at your expression and warns that the sugar will make the curd stick to your teeth for the next half hour. They're right. One elder at the table explains how arul can also be soaked overnight in tea or broth to make it softer and easier to eat, especially for children or the elderly. You make a mental note to try it that way someday. It sounds like the nomadic version of oatmeal. By the time you've worked through your second piece, your jaw feels like it's been through a light workout. But you also notice you're warmer, the slow release of protein and fat seeping into your body like a hidden stove. You understand now why these curds have survived as a staple, tiny, unassuming, yet capable of keeping you going through a long, frozen day. Outside, the sun has climbed a little higher, casting a pale gold over the snow. The air still bites at any exposed skin, but inside the GER, the smell of dairy and smoke wraps around you like a blanket. And just as you're about to lean back in contentment, someone is already setting out the next part of breakfast, proving there's still more to discover before the day truly begins. The table shifts again, as if breakfast here is less a meal and more a slow-moving parade of survival food. You hear a faint clink of ceramic jars and the muted thud of something heavy being set down. When the lids are lifted, a sudden tang wafts into the air, sharp, briny, and slightly sweet. This is where winter takes a surprising turn: preserved vegetables. On a land famous for meat, dairy, and more meat, these jars are the quiet rebels. Inside the first one, you see ribbons of pale cabbage, coiled and glossy in their salty bath. Another jar reveals slices of carrot, their orange still shockingly vivid after months of storage. You spear a piece of cabbage with a fork and take a cautious bite. It snaps crisply, the crunch cutting through the soft, rich textures you've been eating all morning. The flavor wakes you up, a tart brightness that feels almost too modern for the felt-walled GER. For a moment, it's like biting into bottled sunlight from a season you barely remember. Historians still argue whether Mongolian pickling was an adopted technique from Chinese neighbors or an independent evolution. Trade routes certainly brought the knowledge here, but nomads adapted it with their own quirks. Salt was precious, vinegar even more so many pickles relied on natural fermentation, letting thyme and wild microbes do the work. One quirky fact: in the coldest months, jars of preserved vegetables could freeze solid, and families would have to chip away at them with knives before mealtime. You imagine pulling out a jar with frost clinging to the rim, breaking it open like an ice sculpture just to get to the crunchy gold inside. A small dish of turnip slices passes your way, their edges tinged faintly purple. They're softer than the carrots but carry an earthiness that pairs perfectly with the salty mutton you had earlier. Someone grins as you go for seconds. They clearly enjoy watching a newcomer discover that winter here isn't just beige food and broth. The conversation drifts to how vegetables are gathered and stored before the first snow. In autumn, nomads trade with settled farmers or grow hardy crops near their seasonal camps. Those vegetables are cleaned, sliced, salted, and sealed away in clay or glass, often buried partially in the ground to keep them cool until they're needed. One elder laughs and tells you about his childhood trick: sneaking pickled carrot slices out of the jar like candy when no one was looking. The tangy juice would give him away. Of course, his mother could smell it on his breath from across the GER. As you keep eating, you notice something: the vegetables aren't just an occasional treat. They play an important role in breaking the monotony of winter rations, giving the body a bit of vitamin C and the mind a brief escape from the endless horizon of snow and meat. They're a reminder of warmer days, of markets and harvests and colors beyond the white and brown of winter life. The pickles also invite creativity. Someone spoons a bit of cabbage into their steaming bowl of bone broth, transforming it instantly. Another tucks carrot slices into a piece of flatbread with butter. You follow suit, wrapping a strip of mutton around a sliver of pickle and biting down. The sharpness cuts right through the fat, like a cymbal crash in the middle of a slow lullaby. By the time the jars are capped and pushed aside, your palate feels refreshed, reset, almost ready to start breakfast all over again. You lean back, the faint salt and vinegar tang still lingering on your tongue, and glance toward the stove where the next dish is already waiting its turn in this winter morning feast. The next act in this slow-burning breakfast saga arrives in a battered metal teapot, its spout darkened from years of wood smoke and dung fires. The steam curls up like a lazy genie escaping after centuries of confinement, carrying with it a smell you can't quite place: milky, salty, and rich with something buttery beneath the surface. This is sautéed sai, milk tea, the kind of drink that could make or break your morning depending on whether you've learned to love it. At first sip, you're hit with the warm creaminess of fresh milk, but just as you settle into that comfort, The salt arrives, not shy, not a hint, but a full handshake of flavor that yanks you awake in a completely different way than coffee ever could. You probably weren't expecting your tea to taste like soup. But here, on the endless winter steppe, this is the closest thing to drinking liquid comfort wrapped in a wool blanket. The butter stirred into the pot gives it a sheen, and when you set your cup down, you notice the faint ring it leaves, like a warm tide mark. Historically, sautéed tsai has been a staple in Mongolian homes for centuries, consumed from dawn to dusk. Some scholars say it's more accurate to call it milk soup than tea because the tea leaves are so minimal compared to the dairy, while others insist the name holds, since tea was introduced through the Silk Road trade and became inseparable from the drink. Historians still argue whether early versions even used tea leaves at all, or if they were added only when foreign traders passed through with brick tea from China. A quirky fact: in particularly harsh winters, families would make an even richer variant, thickened with extra butter and a pinch of roasted millet, turning the tea into a sort of drinkable porridge. Think of it as a steppe-approved smoothie, except the only green in it is the faint tint from the tea leaves. You cradle the warm bowl in both hands, letting the heat seep into your fingers. Outside, you can hear the muffled stomp of a horse shifting in the snow, the sound somehow amplifying the silence of the steppe. One elder across the table tips his head back, finishing his tea in 3 long pulls, then immediately refills his bowl, barely glancing down as he pours. It's muscle memory here. This tea isn't just a drink, it's a reflex. Someone ladles a fresh round for you, and you notice the way the butter floats in thin ribbons before melting back into the pale liquid. It smells faintly grassy from the summer pastures where the cows and yaks grazed months ago, a reminder that even in this frozen season, the taste of the green steppe lingers in every sip. The salt starts to make sense now. Out here, it's not about quenching thirst, it's about replacing what the cold steals from your body. The fat soothes, the salt fortifies, and the warmth carries both deep into your chest. By the time you set the empty bowl down, you feel steadier, more anchored against the day's wind that's already pressing at the walls of the GER. A younger herder grins at you and asks, "Good?" You nod, though part of you wants to joke that it's like drinking buttered ocean milk, but you know you'll crave it by tomorrow. In fact, you catch yourself looking at the teapot again, hoping for another pour before breakfast finally winds down. Sweetness is a rare visitor on the winter steppe. You're surrounded by white snow and brown earth, but sugar, real sugar, is like a guest from another world, carried in by trade caravans or gifted by travelers. Which is why, when someone at the low table reaches for a small jar of honey, every eye in the GER tilts toward it for just a second. The honey is thick, golden, and slow-moving in the cold air. When the spoon dips in, it comes out with a lazy ribbon of amber that glistens in the firelight. A slice of dense, chewy bread, still warm from the iron, becomes its canvas. The honey seeps into the grain, pooling in tiny valleys before sinking in completely. You bite, and it's almost shocking. After days of meat, dairy, and salt, the sudden hit of sweetness feels almost illegal. It's not cloying, though this honey has a tang, a wildness from the flowers of summer, as if a meadow somehow survived the frost and hid inside the jar. Historically, Mongolian nomads didn't always have honey in winter. Before sugar became more common in Central Asia, sweetness came from what you could gather in warmer months: wild berries, dried fruit, or, for the truly resourceful, the sweet sap from certain steppe plants. Historians still argue whether honey was widely used by nomads before the Mongol Empire's vast trade networks made it easier to obtain, or whether it remained a luxury for special guests and rare celebrations. A quirky tidbit: some families believed that a drop of honey in the morning tea could bring good fortune for travel that day, while too much sweetness would spoil your luck, like tempting fate with excess. Moderation wasn't just health advice, it was a superstition. You watch as the honey jar makes its slow journey around the table, each person taking just enough to coat a bit of bread or stir into their tea. When it's your turn, you feel the weight of those glances, the unspoken agreement that everyone should get a taste. You drizzle a little into your sautéed sai, and the steam rises with a different kind of perfume now, something floral cutting through the butter and salt. For a moment, it feels like a stolen moment of summer. You can almost hear bees in the grass, the wind warm instead of biting, the sky full of dragonflies instead of frost. Then the fire crackles, the wind groans against the GR's felt walls, and you're back in winter, though a little less sharply than before. The sweetness lingers on your tongue long after you've swallowed. You take another bite, slow this time, letting it dissolve into the bread before chewing. Out here, breakfast isn't just about filling your stomach, it's about creating small pockets of warmth and joy to carry into a day where both will be in short supply. The breakfast table in the GER is never truly fixed, it breathes and shifts, just like the people who sit around it. This morning, after the tea and bread, after the honey's golden interruption, someone reaches for a small cloth bundle tied with string. When they untie it, a rich, smoky scent escapes, curling into the warm air, dried meat. The strips are dark, almost mahogany in color, with edges that look like they could snap in half with a crisp tug. These aren't the juicy cuts you might imagine on a summer grill, these are survival rations, made in the warm months and air-dried on racks until they've lost most of their moisture. Out here, the cold acts as the ultimate preservative. You could forget a bag of this meat in your stolbag for weeks, maybe months, and it would still be edible. You take one between your fingers. It's tough at first, resisting your bite, but as you work it with your teeth, the fibers soften, releasing that deep, concentrated flavor of grass-fed beef or mutton. There's no seasoning beyond salt and smoke, but the taste tells its own story of summer pastures, campfires, and the long patience of the wind. Historically, dried meat, called borts, was a critical part of the Mongolian winter diet. It's famously lightweight yet dense in nutrition, making it ideal for travelers, soldiers, and herders spending long hours outside. One mainstream historical fact. Even the warriors of Genghis Khan's armies carried borts, often crumbling it into boiling water to make a quick, hearty soup. Historians still argue whether the exact drying techniques we know today are identical to those used in the 13th century, or if they've subtly shifted with climate and available resources. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some families would powder the dried meat, mix it with hot water, and feed it to the very old or the very young who couldn't chew the tough strips. Imagine instant ramen, but instead of noodles, it's meat dust from the steppe. Not exactly a grocery store shelf item, but effective. Around the table, people chew slowly, the rhythm almost meditative. A young boy takes a strip and tucks half of it into his deal pocket for later. You suspect it might end up as his midday snack while tending the horses. The host, noticing your slowed chewing, chuckles softly. Good for teeth, they say, tapping their own with a fingertip. And they're right, the act of breaking down this stubborn meat feels like it's waking up your jaw, your whole face, in a way coffee never could. By now, you're starting to appreciate that breakfast here isn't a single course but a sequence of offerings, each one balancing the others. The sautéed sai's warmth, the honey's sweetness, the bread's grounding weight, and now the dried meat's endurance. It's a meal designed to last far beyond the table, a kit you carry inside your body into the day's cold and wind. Outside, a horse neighs sharply, and the boy with the meat in his pocket slips out the door. You watch the felt flap fall closed again, the smell of the meat still hanging faintly in the air. You're starting to notice a pattern. Breakfast here is less about what do I feel like eating, and more about what will keep me standing on my feet until the sun sets. Which is why, after the bread, honey, and dried meat, someone sets down a wooden bowl filled with something that looks suspiciously like porridge. It's not oatmeal, too pale, too smooth, and it carries a faint tang. This is tarug porridge, made from fermented yogurt. Thick, creamy, and slightly sour, it's the kind of dish that wakes your tongue up in the morning without being aggressive. The steam rising from it is faint, like the food itself isn't trying to show off. You scoop some into your own small bowl. It clings to the ladle, a little heavier than milk but lighter than custard. The first spoonful is warm, silky, and surprisingly filling. The tang of the fermented milk is softened by the heat, leaving behind a mellow richness that lingers after you swallow. Historically, fermented dairy has been the Mongolian nomads' shield against harsh climates and food scarcity. Tarag, made from cow, goat, or camel milk, wasn't just a breakfast food, it was medicine, a traveler's ration, even a ceremonial offering. One mainstream fact. Tarag is believed to have been consumed by nomads for over 1,000 years, with ancient accounts noting its role in maintaining digestive health. Historians still argue whether its probiotic benefits were fully understood in the past or simply observed, as it keeps you from getting sick in winter. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some regions, tarag was considered best when aged slightly, just enough to give it a stronger aroma that would wake up the spirit. Newcomers might find it alarming, but locals swore by its energizing effect. Around you, spoons scrape softly against wooden bowls. A woman sprinkles in a pinch of millet flour, stirring until the porridge thickens just enough to stand the spoon upright. Someone else crumbles a bit of dried cheese on top, letting it melt into tiny salty bursts. You take another spoonful, and it's easy to imagine this dish being a quiet constant in the lives of people who have seen hundreds of winters pass. It's comfort food, but comfort here doesn't mean indulgence, it means reliability, warmth, and the kind of sustenance that doesn't betray you halfway through the day. As you set your spoon down for a moment, you realize that every item you've eaten this morning shares one thing in common: none of it exists here by accident. Every bite has a reason for being on the table, whether it's a tradition, a survival tactic, or a superstition wrapped in a recipe. Outside, the wind rattles the wooden frame of the GER, but in here, the air is calm, punctuated only by the slow breathing of people eating food they've known all their lives. You're a guest in that rhythm now, spoon in hand, warm from the inside out. By now, your belly is warm, your fingers steady, and the chill that clung to your skin when you first ducked into the GR feels like it belongs to some other lifetime. But the breakfast isn't quite over, not until someone pulls a small, round pot from beside the stove and lifts the lid. A fragrant steam escapes, carrying the unmistakable scent of broth. Inside, thin strands of handmade noodles swirl lazily in a pale, milky soup. Bits of green onion float here and there, a rare splash of color in the beige and cream palette of the morning table. This is noodle soup with meat broth, simple, but almost ceremonial in the way it's ladled into each bowl. You accept yours, the ceramic warm in your hands. The first sip is pure comfort, salty, rich from the marrow of bones boiled for hours, with a softness that feels like it's wrapping your stomach in a wool blanket. The noodles are tender but not limp, carrying just enough bite to keep you awake. In the broth's depth, you catch the faint sweetness of fat rendered from sheep's tail, a delicacy you wouldn't expect in something that looks so humble. A mainstream historical fact here: noodle soups like this became more common in Mongolian cuisine during the later centuries, influenced by trade routes that connected the steppe to China. While nomads have always valued boiled dishes for their efficiency, the presence of wheat noodles marks a shift, proof that even the most tradition-bound diets can bend with the wind. Historians still argue whether such dishes were strictly a winter staple or a more recent adaptation for cold weather comfort. And the quirky tidbit: in some herding families, there's a belief that the last person to finish their bowl of soup will be the slowest herder of the day. You glance around and notice people eating with just a hint more urgency than before. As you eat, there's a quiet satisfaction in knowing this bowl represents the end of the meal's arc, from the wake-up jolt of sautéed sai to the sweet honey bread, the chew of dried meat, and now this soft landing in broth and noodles. You can feel the food settling into you like a second layer of insulation. The host leans back, hands resting on knees, watching everyone finish. Outside, the sun has risen just enough to turn the snow a brighter white, but it's still low in the sky. Breakfast here isn't the quick prelude to a busy day, it's the day's first defense, the invisible armor you wear into the wind. Your bowl is nearly empty now. A last sip, a final strand of noodle, and you set it down, feeling that particular fullness that comes from food that isn't just eaten, but earned through history, through tradition, through the long memory of a people who've been having mornings like this for centuries. The voices around the table soften, conversations tapering into slow murmurs, and the clink of bowls fades into the low hum of the stove's fire. You sink deeper into your seat, letting the weight of the meal anchor you in this warm space while outside, the steppe stretches away into an endless horizon. The smells, wood smoke, milk, broth, are no longer sharp, but rounded, as if they've curled up beside you to rest. Your breathing matches the gentle rhythm of the ger, the sway of its felt walls, the occasional creak of rope. Even the dogs outside have settled, their barks now just distant, muffled notes in the snowy air. You think about how every ingredient you've tasted today has traveled through time, across generations, through storms and seasons, carried not just in saddlebags but in memory. Food here is more than survival, it's the thread that ties one winter to the next, one life to another. Your eyes grow heavy. The tea's warmth lingers in your chest, the broth's richness settles low, and the soft hiss of wind becomes the lullaby of the steppe. In this place, in this moment, you're not just a guest, you're part of the story, if only for the span of a winter's morning. And so you let the last of your thoughts drift away, wrapped in the quiet certainty that somewhere, tomorrow morning, another pot of tea will steam, another bowl of broth will be ladled, and the rhythm will begin again.